In this video, we'll explore a series of home invasions that ended in the one outcome no intruder ever expects. They never made it back out alive. We'll break down what led each of them into these homes, the split-second decisions made by the homeowners, and the moments that turned an attempted burglary into a fatal confrontation. You are watching Verdict Fault. Stay with us.
Number 1. Miguel Antonio de Jesus. In early afternoon on November 14, 2007, Miguel Antonio de Jesus and an accomplice, Diego Ortiz, exited a house in a quiet subdivision near the 6700 block of Timberline Drive, carrying a bag loaded with stolen jewelry, cash, and electronics. They were leaving the home they had just burglarized. The residence belonged to a neighbor of local resident Joe Horn, who was away at the time. De Jesus and Ortiz selected a seemingly unoccupied house in a calm neighborhood, a choice suggesting they hoped for minimal resistance. Their objective was theft, valuables and electronics that could be quickly removed and sold. There was no indication they intended to confront any occupant. Their plan appeared to be a swift break-in and escape. Unbeknownst to them, 61-year-old Joe Horn was inside his own home, watching as they broke in next door. Holding a 12-gauge shotgun, Horn observed their movements and dialed 911. Over the phone, he described in real time what he was witnessing: forced entry, movement through the house, and finally the suspects emerging with a bag of stolen goods. The dispatcher repeatedly warned Horn not to confront them. Officers were en route and cautioned that property was not worth risking his life over. Despite the repeated warnings, Horn insisted he would not let them get away. As the burglary ended and De Jesus and Ortiz walked away from the house, Horn exited his home, stepped into his yard with the shotgun, and issued a verbal command. Immediately afterward, amid overlapping noise on the tape, came 3 shotgun blasts. Both men collapsed either in or near Horn's yard. When police and emergency responders arrived, both De Jesus and Ortiz were dead. A bag containing the stolen property was found nearby. Neither man was carrying a weapon, only burglary tools and the stolen items. Later forensic review noted that at least one of the victims appeared to have been shot from behind while moving away, but due to shotgun pellet spread and extensive tissue damage, the medical examiner was unable to definitively determine the angle of entry. Authorities identified the deceased as 38-year-old Miguel Antonio de Jesus and 30-year-old Diego Ortiz. Investigations further revealed De Jesus was actually a Colombian national living under an alias, with a prior conviction for cocaine trafficking and a 1999 deportation on record. Both men were undocumented at the time of the burglary. Pasadena police questioned Horn but did not arrest him. Law enforcement submitted their reports, the 911 call, ballistics data, and other evidence to the Harris County District Attorney's Office. A grand jury convened to consider whether charges were warranted. On June 30, 2008, the jury declined to indict, ruling that Horn's actions did not constitute a criminal offense. In the jury's view, under the relevant Texas statutes, Horn's use of deadly force was legally justified. The shooting was deemed a justifiable homicide, and the case was closed. Once the 911 recordings became public, the incident ignited widespread controversy. Protesters gathered outside Horn's residence, labeling the shooting as vigilante justice, especially critical of the fact both victims were unarmed and of Hispanic descent. Others defended Horn, arguing he acted within his rights to protect the neighborhood and prevent the escape of burglary suspects. The case quickly became central in national debates over citizen intervention, immigration enforcement, and the legal boundaries of using deadly force to protect property. The decision not to indict was widely cited in conversations about the reach of the Texas Castle Doctrine and what reasonable fear looks like when property crimes intersect with perceived self-defense. In the end, 2 men burglarized a neighbor's home, fled with stolen property, and were shot by the homeowner as they left. A grand jury ruled the shooting lawful. While the central facts, intrusion, theft, escape, and deadly force were not in dispute, the case stirred ongoing public arguments about justice, race, and property rights. Number 2. Derek Ephraim Condon. Just before daybreak in mid-March 2024, 39-year-old Derek Ephraim Condon made his way to a remote stretch of Bingham County, Idaho. The rural home on West 600 North was still quiet, its elderly owner, 85-year-old Christine Janayan, asleep in her bedroom. Investigators would later learn Condon had crossed paths with her years earlier at the pawn shop and gun range she once owned. That prior contact, prosecutors believe, played a role in why he chose her home. He parked his white Honda CR-V nearly a mile from the residence in a rocky, secluded patch of land unlikely to draw attention. He approached the property on foot, carrying an arsenal, a 9mm handgun, a .22 caliber pistol equipped with a suppressor, duct tape, rope, 2 sets of handcuffs, and a ski mask. Every step suggested premeditation. Nothing about his approach resembled a spontaneous crime. Around 2 a.m., he broke a rear door window using a screwdriver. With the house in darkness, he moved down the hall and into Christine's bedroom. When she opened her eyes, a flashlight and a gun were already pointed at her face. Bloodstains later found on the pillow and carpet showed he struck her early in the attack. He forced Christine into the living room, handcuffing her to a wooden chair. Demands came immediately. He wanted valuables and he wanted them fast. She told him she had little to give, but when he pressed the gun to her head, she disclosed 2 safes located downstairs. While he searched the basement, Christine stayed bound to the chair, bleeding and listening as he moved through the house. During one of his trips below, he discovered her adult disabled son in a downstairs room. That discovery, according to the prosecutor's report, heightened his aggression. He returned upstairs, issued more threats, and warned her that she would not survive the night. The moment he went back downstairs, Christine acted. Inch by inch, she dragged the heavy chair down the hallway toward her bedroom. Under her pillow was a .357 Magnum revolver, a firearm she kept for emergencies. Christine had decades of shooting experience and had once trained competitive marksmen. Still handcuffed, she managed to retrieve the gun and pull the chair back into the living room, hiding the revolver between the couch cushion and armrest. When Condon returned, his threats continued. Christine later told investigators she was certain she was about to be killed. She waited for her moment. Then she reached for the revolver and fired twice. Both bullets struck Condon in the chest. Condon reacted immediately, raising his 9mm pistol and emptying the magazine. Gunfire tore through the living room. Christine was struck multiple times in the leg, arm, abdomen, and chest, and collapsed, still handcuffed to the chair. Mortally wounded, Condon stumbled into the kitchen and collapsed. He died there. Christine lay on the living room floor, bleeding heavily, unable to move. Her son, still downstairs, did not grasp the severity of what had happened. Hours passed. Roughly 10 hours after the shooting, her son managed to bring her a phone. Around midday, Christine called 911 and reported the intruder dead inside her home. Deputies arrived at approximately 12:17 p.m. They found Condon deceased in the kitchen, Christine critically injured but alive, the broken rear door window, firearms, ammunition, restraints, and duct tape, shell casings throughout the living room, clear signs of forced entry and violent struggle. Tracks in the dirt led investigators back to the remote area where Condon had parked his Honda CR-V. Inside the vehicle, they found ammunition, cash, and other items consistent with a planned robbery. A 47-page sheriff's report documented the evidence in detail. Every major point of Christine's account matched the physical scene, from the dragged chair marks to blood patterns to footprints in the hallway. No evidence contradicted her. Christine was airlifted to Eastern Idaho Regional Medical Center for emergency surgery. Bingham County Prosecutor Ryan Jolly conducted a full use-of-force review, examining ballistic trajectories, scene photographs, physical evidence, timeline reconstruction, and interviews with Christine and her son. His conclusion: Christine acted in lawful self-defense under Idaho law. Jolly stated publicly that if Condon had lived, he would have faced charges including attempted murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, burglary, and aggravated battery. Instead, the shooting was ruled a justifiable homicide. He called Christine's actions one of the most extraordinary acts of self-preservation he had ever reviewed. The case gained national attention due to the dramatic mismatch between attacker and victim, a heavily armed intruder versus an elderly woman bound to a chair. It highlighted the dangers faced by isolated rural homeowners and the speed at which a targeted break-in can escalate into attempted murder.
Although Condon had no criminal convictions in local records, relatives told investigators he had been mentally unstable in the months before the attack. Combined with his equipment, planning, and methodical entry, the evidence pointed to a deliberate, targeted crime rather than a spur-of-the-moment burglary. For prosecutors and investigators, the case closed cleanly. All evidence supported the same conclusion: a violent, premeditated home invasion, an elderly victim facing imminent death, and a final act of self-defense that ended the threat inside that home. Christine survived her injuries. Condon did not. Number 3. Keandre Funches. Around 2:30 a.m., 27-year-old Keandre Funches entered a home on Grigg Street in Marietta. According to police, he wasn't acting alone. Investigators later identified Javarian Mitchell, a man with access to the house, as the individual who led him inside. The homeowner, a mother of 3 referred to in records as Green, was awake when she heard movement in her hallway. When she stepped outside her bedroom, she saw Funches already inside the home. Detectives documented her statement that he threatened her with a handgun, and she believed her children were in immediate danger. The confrontation unfolded in seconds. Green grabbed the firearm she kept inside the home. Police reports confirm she fired during the face-to-face encounter. Responding officers found Funches unresponsive. He was pronounced dead inside the residence. Green and her husband were taken in for questioning as investigators worked to establish the sequence of events. Her children were briefly placed with relatives while detectives processed the scene. Police quickly focused on Mitchell, the man who brought Funches into the home. He was arrested that same day and charged with aggravated assault, false imprisonment, cruelty to children, and felony murder-related counts tied to the break-in. Detectives recovered evidence connecting him directly to facilitating the intrusion. Even though the initial evidence suggested a defensive shooting, the Cobb County District Attorney pursued homicide charges against Green. That decision moved the case into the courtroom. Toxicology reports later revealed that Funches had methamphetamine in his system, and he had possible underlying health issues, though those details were only partially released. These factors became relevant because they created uncertainty about the exact medical cause of death. Green's defense argued that she was a mother suddenly confronted by an armed intruder at 2:30 a.m. She believed he intended to harm her children, and she responded as any reasonable parent would, protecting their family from an immediate threat inside their home. Prosecutors argued that the shooting still required careful legal scrutiny. They highlighted testimony about the position of Funches' body, evidence collected near the point of entry, statements about how the confrontation unfolded, and the role Mitchell played in orchestrating the incident. Expert testimony indicated methamphetamine levels in Funches' system were high. His physical condition might have contributed to his death. These factors made it impossible to determine whether the gunshot alone was the sole cause of death. That uncertainty became central to the jury's assessment. After hearing all evidence, the 911 call, the physical threats described by Green, the forced entry facilitated by Mitchell, the toxicology and medical uncertainty, the 2:30 a.m. intrusion, and the jury's findings, the courts concluded that the shooting was self-defense, not a criminal act.
Number 4. Nicholas Brady. On Thanksgiving Day, November 22, 2012, 17-year-old Nicholas Brady entered the home of Byron David Smith in Little Falls, Minnesota. He climbed through a broken window on the north side of the property. His cousin, 18-year-old Hale Kiefer, stayed outside, preparing to follow him moments later. What neither teenager realized was that Smith, a 64-year-old retiree, was already in the basement waiting with a loaded Mini 14 rifle. Smith had spent weeks convinced someone would break in again. He believed he had been the target of several burglaries earlier that year, telling friends and neighbors that items belonging to his late father, along with cash and tools, had been taken. By November, he had removed light bulbs around the property, regularly carried a handgun even indoors, and set up a digital audio recorder in the basement. Around midday, the recorder captured the sound of glass breaking upstairs. Smith did not call 911. Instead, he remained seated near the bottom of the staircase with the rifle pointed toward the landing. When Brady began to descend the stairs, only his legs appeared in Smith's line of sight. The recording captured 2 initial shots, followed by Brady collapsing onto the concrete floor. Smith then walked over and fired another close-range round. Brady died in the basement. Smith dragged the body onto a tarp and moved it to a workshop area. Roughly 10 to 15 minutes passed. Kiefer then entered the home and came down the same steps, unaware of what had occurred. Smith fired as she reached the lower portion of the staircase, causing her to fall. He shot her again as she lay on the floor. When she continued to make noise, Smith fired once more and, after a short pause, delivered a final shot beneath her chin. Autopsy findings later confirmed multiple wounds, including a fatal close-range round delivered while she was incapacitated. Smith left both bodies in the basement overnight. The following day, he asked a neighbor to help him find a lawyer. Concerned by the request, the neighbor notified the sheriff's office. When deputies arrived, Smith calmly stated that there were 2 dead people in the basement and guided officers inside. They found the bodies on separate tarps, spent shell casings on the floor, and the digital audio recorder still running.
You're dead. Oh, sorry about that. Oh, yeah. You're dying. Bitch. Cute. I'm sure she thought she was a real pro. I feel a little bit safer.
Neither teen had a weapon. Investigators found no evidence they were armed. During interviews, Smith claimed he feared the intruders might be armed and believed he had the right to defend himself. Prosecutors focused heavily on the audio recording, which captured Smith's remarks before, during, and after the shootings. According to court records, the recording revealed Smith waited in a prepared position, fired additional shots after the teens were down, delivered fatal close-range shots when the intruders were no longer a threat, and made comments indicating he anticipated a confrontation. Prosecutors argued that these actions went far beyond lawful self-defense. In April 2014, following a multi-day trial, the jury deliberated only a few hours before finding Smith guilty of 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder, 2 counts of second-degree murder. Minnesota law mandates life imprisonment without parole for first-degree murder, and the judge imposed that sentence. Smith appealed, arguing that the state's castle doctrine protected his actions. The Minnesota Supreme Court unanimously upheld the conviction, ruling the doctrine did not apply once the threat had subsided and that the recording clearly showed intentional, unjustified killings. The case received national attention because it tested the boundary between self-defense and criminal homicide. Prosecutors emphasized that it was not the initial defensive shots that determined Smith's guilt, but the continued use of deadly force after the teenagers were down and no longer posing an imminent danger. Legal analysts and court rulings repeatedly cited the recording as the decisive piece of evidence. 2 unarmed teens entered a home intending to steal. Smith used deadly force, but the additional shots, delivered after the threat had ended, transformed the incident from self-defense into murder. Byron Smith remains incarcerated at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Oak Park Heights, serving life without the possibility of parole. The Little Falls case continues to be referenced in legal commentary and academic discussions as a defining example of how defensive force becomes unlawful once an intruder is incapacitated, a dividing line recorded in real time by Smith's own audio device.
Number 5. Javonte Ingram. It was a little before 6 p.m. on May 19, 2009, when 16-year-old Antoine Speedy Parker rushed through the front door of Reliable Discount Pharmacy in South Oklahoma City. He wore a ski mask and moved straight toward the counter. Behind him was 14-year-old Javonte Ingram, carrying a handgun that adult organizers had supplied earlier that afternoon. The 2 teenagers intended to rob the store, grab cash, take narcotics, and run back to the stolen getaway car waiting outside with 2 adult accomplices. What they didn't expect was that the pharmacist on duty, 57-year-old Jerome Ersland, had already reached for the handgun he kept hidden behind the counter. As Parker approached, the 2 female employees sprinted into a back room. Ersland pulled his pistol and fired a single round. That bullet struck Parker in the head, dropping him instantly onto the pharmacy floor. Ingram fled at once, running out the door and out of camera range. Up to this point, detectives and prosecutors later agreed the shooting was lawful self-defense. Oklahoma's statutes allow employees and business owners to use deadly force when confronted with an armed robbery. The initial shot fit that framework. What happened after the first shot is what the entire case turned on. After firing the initial round, Ersland stepped outside to pursue Ingram, but quickly stopped due to chronic back pain. He came back inside less than a minute later. The surveillance cameras captured what followed. Parker remained flat on his back, motionless. Ersland stepped around him. He placed his first gun on the counter, opened a drawer, retrieved a second gun, walked back to Parker, fired 5 additional shots into the teenager's torso. According to the Oklahoma Medical Examiner, those 5 abdominal shots, not the head wound, were the injuries that killed Parker. Police and emergency medical teams arrived shortly afterward. The video, the shell casings, and the autopsy findings formed the backbone of the investigation. In interviews, including televised ones, Ersland claimed Parker was still moving and talking when he fired the additional rounds. Prosecutors later argued that the surveillance footage clearly contradicted him. Parker never sat up, reached out, or attempted to stand. He remained unconscious from the moment he fell. Detectives also confirmed Parker was unarmed when the fatal shots were fired. The only weapon brought into the pharmacy by the teens was Ingram's handgun, which he fled with. Oklahoma County District Attorney David Prater publicly separated the case into 2 phases. First shot – justified. Final 5 shots – unlawful and deliberate. Prosecutors described the final act as an execution of an incapacitated suspect. In 2011, after a full trial and a short deliberation period, a jury convicted Ersland of first-degree murder. They recommended life with the possibility of parole. Judge Ray Elliott imposed that sentence. The legal fallout did not end with Ersland. Under Oklahoma's felony murder statute, which applies when someone dies during the commission of a violent felony, the adult planners were also charged. 2 men, Emmanuel Mitchell and Anthony Black, were accused of organizing the robbery and providing the weapon to Ingram. Morrison's first-degree murder conviction and life sentence were upheld. Mitchell's conviction was reversed on procedural grounds and a retrial was ordered. Ingram, because he was only 14, was processed through the juvenile justice system. Ersland appealed his conviction. In 2013, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the verdict, writing explicitly that Ersland was not convicted for firing the lawful first shot. He was convicted for the final 5 rounds fired at an incapacitated, unarmed person. Subsequent federal habeas filings raised issues about Ersland's memory of where the second gun came from. Federal judges rejected those arguments, pointing again to the surveillance footage and Ersland's inconsistent explanations. The case spread nationally because it sat at the intersection of self-defense in a violent felony, video evidence, and the legal boundary between threat neutralized and excessive force. Early public reactions cast Ersland as a veteran and pharmacist defending his store. But when jurors saw the full surveillance footage and medical findings, they reached the same conclusion prosecutors did. The moment Parker hit the ground, the threat ended, and every shot that followed crossed the line into criminal homicide. Today, Jerome Ersland remains incarcerated on a life sentence. Antone Parker's death is widely referenced in legal circles as defining examples of how self-defense laws change the moment an assailant is no longer a threat. The cameras recorded the entire timeline: the entry, the initial shot, the pursuit, the return, and the final volley. And that unbroken sequence of video is what ultimately decided the case. Number 6. Ricky Slater. At around 3:20 a.m. on March 26, 2016, 40-year-old Ricky Slater was moving through the hallway of a home in the Newcastle suburb of Hamilton. He carried a shoulder bag containing 3 knives, along with cannabis and methamphetamine. Court records later established that he stepped into or near the bedroom of a baby girl, though the infant and her mother were away from the home that night. The homeowner, 33-year-old chef Benjamin Batteram, was awake when he heard movement inside the house. What began as a confrontation indoors quickly spilled into the driveway and then into the street outside, where the fatal struggle occurred. As soon as Batteram confronted him, Slater bolted to the front of the house and into the driveway. Batteram ran after him. Multiple witnesses later described seeing Batteram tackle Slater and place him in a chokehold while delivering punches. Several neighbors told police they repeatedly asked Batteram to stop. According to their statements, the struggle continued until Slater lost consciousness. Officers and paramedics arrived within minutes. Slater suffered a series of cardiac arrests and died in the hospital the following day. The investigation confirmed several key details. Slater had broken into the home while carrying knives. He was heavily intoxicated on methamphetamine. Medical examinations revealed he had underlying heart disease. Specialists later testified that this combination – drug toxicity, stress, exertion, and heart disease – put Slater at extreme risk of sudden cardiac arrest. That finding would complicate attempts to conclusively link his death to the chokehold alone. Charges and prosecution strategy. Police charged Batteram with murder, and prosecutors later presented the case as one involving excessive, continued force. They pointed to witness accounts describing a sustained chokehold, statements alleging Batteram made threats during the struggle, reports that Slater was already restrained and unable to flee. Their argument was that Batteram crossed the legal boundary of self-defense and used more force than was necessary to detain an intruder. Batteram's legal team countered that he encountered an armed intruder inside his home. The location of the break-in, near the bedroom of his infant daughter, gave him every reason to believe the threat was serious. He pursued Slater only to detain him until police arrived, a lawful citizen's arrest under NSW law. Medical experts called by the defense testified that Slater's fatal cardiac arrests resulted from multiple overlapping factors and that the chokehold alone could not be medically identified as the sole cause of death. Trial, testimony, and verdict. Over 2 weeks of proceedings, the jury heard toxicology reports showing high methamphetamine levels, evidence of Slater's heart disease, statements about the chokehold, forensic analysis of the struggle in the driveway, the items found in Slater's bag. Medical specialists testified that Slater's death resulted from multiple overlapping factors and that the chokehold alone could not be definitively linked to the fatal outcome. After reviewing the full record, the jury found Batteram not guilty of murder, not guilty of manslaughter. The court accepted that he acted in self-defense and within the legal bounds of a citizen's arrest, given the armed break-in. Months later, a judge reviewed the prosecution's decision to pursue homicide charges. The judge concluded the decision had been unreasonable, citing the lack of medical certainty tying Batterham's actions directly to Slater's death. Batterham was allowed to recover significant legal costs. The case became a national flashpoint in Australia. Some saw Batterham as a father defending his home from a dangerous intruder. Others argued the incident showed how quickly restraint can escalate into lethal violence, especially when a suspect is already pinned down. But the evidentiary record, including the knives, the break-in, the methamphetamine levels, Slater's heart condition, and the medical uncertainty surrounding causation shaped both the jury's decision and the judicial review that followed. And that record explains why the fatal encounter between Benjamin Batterham and Ricky Slater on a quiet Newcastle street was ultimately ruled self-defense, not unlawful homicide. Number 7. Andrea Miller. On the evening of July 22, 2014, 28-year-old Andrea Miller walked into the garage doorway of an elderly man's home in Long Beach, California. She wasn't alone. With her was 26-year-old Gus Richard Adams, her partner in a burglary series that had targeted this same residence before. They chose the home of 80-year-old Thomas Greer because they believed he lived alone and kept cash in a safe. They had allegedly broken in prior to this night, familiarity that investigators say emboldened them to return. When Greer stepped into his hallway, he found both intruders already inside. The encounter turned physical almost immediately. According to police and court filings, Greer was thrown or shoved to the floor, fracturing his collarbone and injuring his shoulder. Miller and Adams moved past him, found his safe, and forced it open. They grabbed cash and began fleeing toward the rear of the house. Greer, injured and frightened, retrieved a .22 caliber revolver he kept inside the residence. Believing the intruders might come back and that he could not defend himself if they did, he followed them out toward the alley behind his property. The exact distance between Greer and the burglars varies slightly in different witness recollections, but verified reports all agree on the key sequence. Miller was running away. Adams was fleeing ahead of her. Greer fired a single shot in the alley. The bullet struck Miller in the torso. She collapsed and died at the scene. Adams kept running but was detained minutes later after neighbors called 911. The pregnancy claim and immediate investigation. In early interviews, Greer told police and reporters that Miller had yelled she was pregnant. This claim quickly became the most publicized element of the story, but the Los Angeles County coroner later confirmed she was not pregnant. Detectives photographed the alley, documented the forced entry, recorded Greer's injuries, and recovered the damaged safe. They found no weapons on either intruder. That fact, combined with the pursuit outside the home, shaped the legal review that followed. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office reviewed all evidence: Greer's age and injuries, the burglary inside the house, the forced entry, the cash taken from the safe, the physical assault, the location of the fatal shot. California law required prosecutors to disprove self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt before filing homicide charges. After analyzing the full case file, the DA's office announced that no charges would be filed against Greer. Their reasoning? Greer had been violently overpowered inside his own home. He reasonably believed he remained in danger. Prosecutors could not prove malicious intent. Though the shooting occurred as the suspects fled, the overall circumstances, including the assault on an elderly homeowner, made a criminal filing unsustainable under California law. Instead, responsibility for Miller's death shifted to her accomplice. Under California's felony murder framework, when a death occurs during a dangerous felony like home invasion burglary, accomplices can legally be held responsible for the outcome, even if they did not fire a weapon. Adams was charged with first-degree residential burglary, first-degree robbery. He later pleaded guilty to those charges and was sentenced to more than 10 years in state prison. Prosecutors stated publicly that if full felony murder charges had been pursued, Adams could have faced a life sentence. The autopsy confirmed Miller died from a single gunshot wound. She was not pregnant. No weapons were found on either intruder. Detectives documented the crime scene thoroughly: blood patterns, the damaged safe, the garage entry point, injuries on Greer's body, and the trail into the alley. Every major piece of evidence supported the DA's conclusion. 2 burglars assaulted an elderly man and stole money. The homeowner retrieved a firearm and fired a fatal shot during the escape. Prosecutors could not prove the shooting constituted unlawful homicide. The case appeared in national news cycles because it highlighted tension between the rights of elderly homeowners, questions about proportional force, and the blurred line between self-defense and pursuit. But for investigators, the evidence was straightforward. 2 much younger adults forcibly entered Greer's home, assaulted him, and took money from his safe. Greer fired 1 round during the chaotic escape. Adams was held legally accountable. Greer was not charged. Andrea Miller died in an alley behind the home they had just burglarized, and prosecutors concluded that the 80-year-old man who pulled the trigger acted in a way they could not criminally disprove.
Number 8. Fred Barras. Just before midnight on August 20th, 1999, 16-year-old Fred Barras and 29-year-old Brendan Fearon slipped into an isolated farmhouse known as Bleak House in the quiet rural stretch of Emnith-Hungate, Norfolk. They pushed inside through a ground-floor window, moving through the shadowed rooms of a property that locals knew had been hit by burglars before. Upstairs, 54-year-old farmer Tony Martin was awake. He lived alone and had spent years reporting thefts, damage, and trespassing on his land. On this night, he was positioned at the top of the staircase with a Winchester Model 1300 pump-action shotgun, a weapon he was not legally permitted to own. Records show Martin had lost his legal shotgun license after a 1994 incident in which he fired at a man's vehicle. Despite that revocation, the weapon remained in his possession. He later told investigators he believed intruders were entering his home again and that he feared for his life due to the repeated break-ins. Forensic reconstruction and evidence presented in court described what happened next. From the upstairs landing, Martin fired into the dimly lit space below as Barras and Fearon moved inside the house. The shotgun was loaded with birdshot. He discharged 3 rounds. 1 shot was fired from the staircase position. 2 more blasts came as the intruders turned to run back toward the window they had entered. Barras was struck from behind. Pellets hit his back, buttocks, and legs. Fearon was wounded in the leg but managed to escape through the window and flee across the fields. Barras staggered outside but collapsed near the property. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. Fearon was later found and treated for his injuries. Neither intruder carried a firearm. Investigators confirmed both men had entered the property intending to steal, consistent with a string of burglaries in the surrounding region. Norfolk Constabulary documented the angle of the shots, the shell casings, and the body's position outside the house. The illegal shotgun was seized. Trajectory analysis indicated the fatal shot struck Barras while he was running away. The Crown Prosecution Service charged Martin within months, focusing on the central issue under English law: was the force he used reasonable for self-defense? Prosecutors argued Martin fired from a protected, elevated position. The teenagers were attempting to flee. Shooting a retreating burglar with an illegal firearm exceeded any lawful threshold of reasonable force. At trial in April 2000, jurors heard expert testimony describing the downward angle of the shots and the direction of the pellets striking Barras from behind. Prosecutors emphasized that English law only permits force proportionate to the threat, and that the threat had passed once the intruders turned to escape. The defense countered that Martin, living alone on a repeatedly targeted farm, believed he could be attacked and acted out of fear. They highlighted years of police reports and Martin's ongoing sense of vulnerability. The jury convicted him of murder of Fred Barras,
wounding with intent toward Brendan Fearon, and firearms offenses for the illegal shotgun. He received a life sentence for murder with additional concurrent sentences. His legal team appealed. New psychiatric evaluations presented to the Court of Appeal diagnosed him with paranoid personality disorder and later Asperger's syndrome, conditions that, according to the court, substantially impaired his judgment at the time of the shooting. In October 2001, the court substituted the murder conviction for manslaughter by diminished responsibility. His sentence was reduced to 5 years with a concurrent 3-year term for the wounding. He served roughly 3 years before being released on license in July 2003. The case ignited one of the most intense debates in modern British criminal law. Many supporters portrayed Martin as a homeowner abandoned by the system and pushed to defend himself. Others argued the case proved the opposite, that lethal force against a retreating intruder is unlawful, regardless of prior victimization. The photographic evidence, the forensic trajectories, the illegal weapon, and the psychiatric findings submitted on appeal created a detailed factual record. And that record explains why the death of 16-year-old Fred Barras at Bleak House became one of the most heavily scrutinized self-defense cases in the UK.
Number 9. Maxwell Cook. Just after noon on a Monday in late March 2017, 19-year-old Maxwell Cook walked onto the Peters family property in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. He wasn't alone. With him were 2 longtime friends, Jacob Redfern and Jacob Woodruff, all dressed in black, wearing gloves and masks. Earlier that same morning, the group had already burglarized a detached garage, stealing liquor and speakers. But when they returned, they had a bigger target in mind: the main house. Their getaway driver, 21-year-old Elizabeth Rodriguez, waited in a nearby car, messaging instructions and guiding the teenagers toward what she believed was a home full of valuables. Around 12:30 p.m., the trio shattered a back glass door and stepped inside the residence. Investigators later documented the force of the entry, the broken glass, and the clothing all 3 wore to hide their identities. At least 2 of them brought weapons, brass knuckles, and a knife. Nothing about the break-in was accidental. This was a coordinated burglary. Inside the home, 23-year-old Zachary Peters heard the window break. He was there with his father. Peters retrieved an AR-15-style rifle kept in the house and moved toward the noise. The teens moved through multiple rooms before Peters encountered them. According to deputies, the encounter was almost instantaneous. No warnings, no verbal exchange, only seconds separating the entry from the gunfire. Peters fired multiple rounds. 2 of the intruders fell inside the kitchen. The third fled toward the back door, collapsed in the driveway, and died near the edge of the property. When the shooting stopped, Peters retreated to his room and called 911. His voice, steady but rattled, told the dispatcher exactly what had happened. 3 men broke into the home. He shot at them, and the weapon he used was an AR-15. First responders arrived quickly. Paramedics confirmed all 3 intruders were deceased. Neither Peters nor his father sustained injuries. Only hours after the shooting, 21-year-old Elizabeth Rodriguez walked into the Broken Arrow Police Department. She told detectives she had information about the incident, then admitted she planned the burglary, drove the teens to the Peters home, and waited while they broke in. Investigators learned she'd previously been inside or near the residence and believed valuable items were stored there. That information shaped the burglary earlier that morning and the decision to return later for the main house. Rodriguez was arrested and charged with 3 counts of felony murder, first-degree burglary, conspiracy, and related offenses. Under Oklahoma's felony murder rule, all participants in a dangerous felony can be charged with murder if anyone dies during the crime, even if they never enter the home. As the organizer and getaway driver, Rodriguez qualified under that statute. Court records later show she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and burglary and received a 32-year prison sentence. While charges moved forward against Rodriguez, the Wagner County District Attorney's Office reviewed Peters' actions.
Assistant District Attorney Jack Thorpe studied the 911 call, physical evidence, photos of the shattered door, witness statements, and autopsy findings. On April 3, 2017, he announced Peters would not face charges. Thorpe stated that Peters acted lawfully under Oklahoma's Castle Doctrine, a statute that allows homeowners to use deadly force against intruders who break into occupied properties. The teens were masked, armed, and forced their way into a locked residence. Legally, the decision was straightforward. The homeowner was justified. Family members of the deceased teens later argued that the outcome was too severe, that the boys made a terrible decision but should not have died for it. Investigators countered with the facts. The teens had already burglarized the property earlier that day. They were masked and equipped for a confrontation. They returned with a plan to steal more. They forced their way into an occupied home. Law enforcement officials emphasized that homeowners are not expected to pause and analyze an intruder's intent during a violent break-in. Detectives pieced together the full timeline: the first burglary of the garage, stolen items recovered, communication between the teens and Rodriguez, weapons found on or near the bodies, forced entry into the house, Peters' 911 call and statements, the autopsy results, the teen who collapsed outside while fleeing. The physical evidence matched every major detail. No reports contradicted the central facts. Aftermath and impact. The Broken Arrow 3 homicide case became one of Oklahoma's most widely discussed home defense incidents in years. It highlighted how quickly burglaries can escalate, the legal power of the Castle Doctrine, and the consequences of entering an occupied home armed and masked. The official conclusion remained consistent across investigators, prosecutors, and court records: a planned burglary, 3 masked teens, a homeowner who responded in self-defense, and a getaway driver held accountable under felony murder laws.
Number 10. Diren Dede. Near midnight on April 27, 2014, 17-year-old Diren Dede, a German exchange student spending the school year in Missoula, Montana, slipped through a partially open garage door on the city's southwest side. Like other teens in the neighborhood that spring, he'd been garage hopping, a local trend where kids wandered into unlocked garages looking for beer or easily grabbed items. What Dede didn't know was that the opening in the garage door wasn't accidental, and neither was the purse placed in plain view near the entrance. The garage had been staged. 3 weeks prior, homeowner Marcus Karma had reported at least one burglary at his residence. Items taken from the garage included marijuana and personal property. Friends and neighbors later told investigators that Karma was furious about the thefts. He felt targeted and loudly expressed that frustration. In the days before the shooting, Karma and his partner Janelle Flagger installed motion detectors and pointed a baby monitor directly at the garage interior. Witnesses testified Karma talked about catching the person he believed was stealing from him. One witness recalled him saying he was waiting to shoot some kid. These statements would later become some of the most important evidence at trial. Shortly before midnight, the motion alarms activated. The baby monitor lit up inside the house. Dede had stepped inside the garage, unaware he had triggered a surveillance trap. Karma grabbed a loaded 12-gauge shotgun and walked toward the open garage. According to forensic reconstruction and trial testimony, he did not yell any commands. He did not announce himself. He did not check who was inside or whether the person was armed. He stopped outside the threshold and fired 4 blasts directly into the dark interior. 3 rounds traveled low, sweeping sideways as though following movement. One higher shot struck Dede in the head. Another hit his arm. The teenager collapsed immediately. Paramedics arrived minutes later, but Dede died on the garage floor. He had no weapon. He had taken nothing. He had been inside for only moments. Detectives quickly zeroed in on the distinction between defending one's home and creating conditions designed to lure an intruder inside. They documented the partially raised garage door, the purse placed just inside, the motion sensors, the baby monitor aimed at the interior, witness statements about Karma waiting up at night, text messages, and prior comments expressing anger about the burglaries. Prosecutors concluded this was not a spontaneous reaction to a break-in, it was an ambush built over weeks. Karma's attorneys argued he acted under Montana's version of the Castle Doctrine, a law that allows homeowners to use force against intruders inside an occupied structure. They pointed to the prior burglary and suggested Karma believed D-Day could be armed. But prosecutors countered that the law did not allow firing blindly into darkness without assessing any threat. They emphasized that D-Day never advanced toward the house, never spoke, never displayed a weapon, and had not threatened violence. In December 2014, after a multi-week trial, a Missoula County jury found Karma guilty of deliberate homicide. Jurors told reporters afterward that the evidence they weighed most heavily included the surveillance devices, the staged condition of the garage, Karma's prior statements, and the shotgun's firing pattern. They concluded the shooting was intentional, not a moment of fear, but an act rooted in anger and preparation. On February 12, 2015, District Judge Ed McLean sentenced Karma to 70 years in prison, requiring at least 20 years before parole eligibility. The judge told the courtroom that Karma posed a danger to the community and that his actions were driven by retaliation, not protection. D-Day's parents traveled from Hamburg to Tantally to attend the trial and sentencing. They said the conviction brought accountability but could never compensate for their son's death. Karma appealed, arguing that extensive media coverage denied him a fair trial and Montana's self-defense statutes were misapplied. In 2017, the Montana Supreme Court unanimously upheld the conviction, stating the evidence overwhelmingly supported the jury's determination that Karma acted with purposeful intent. A petition to the U.S. Supreme Court was denied. A later post-conviction claim alleging ineffective counsel was also rejected. The shooting of Diren Dede became a national reference point for discussions about the limits of self-defense laws, the dangers of baiting intruders, and the line between fear-driven reaction and premeditated force. For investigators, the evidence told a consistent story. From the staged barrage to the pattern of shotgun blasts, nothing contradicted the conclusion that Karma had been waiting for and anticipating the moment someone stepped inside. A teenager out seeking alcohol entered a darkened garage. A homeowner, fueled by anger from prior thefts, fired without warning. And a fatal shooting in a quiet Montana neighborhood became a deliberate homicide under the law.
If you found this breakdown helpful and want more verified, fact-driven true crime investigations, make sure you subscribe to Verdict Vault. Turn on notifications so you never miss a case, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every perspective helps us understand these incidents a little better. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.